So my first question is, why did you decide on a career in television?
I didn't really decide. It just seemed to happen. I started off in newspapers at the old Ottawa Journal, as a matter of fact, before I graduated from college, and I never considered anything really but print. And then I got moved to Washington, or New York first. I was a New York correspondent for the Montreal Star for about 3 or 4 years, and then got moved to Washington, where I became the Washington correspondent for the same paper, and I was there for another 3 or 4 years. Came back to Canada and was in Ottawa when working for the Toronto Star, their parliamentary bureau, and I had a chance to join the United Nations Association in Canada as their national director. I'd been interested in the UN in New York and had spent a lot of time over there writing things. So it seemed like a good fit, and I did it. After a couple of years of that, I had had enough and I really wanted to get back to the media. And a friend suggested I should try the CBC News. They were always looking for writers in their Toronto newsroom. And that's what I did, and I wound up as a writer for the CBC National News, and a guy who was an old buddy, Stanley Burke, who was then reading the National. So one thing led to another. But, no real decision on my part, it just happened.
So why do you think the late 1950s to the 1960s was called the golden age of television?
I'm not quite sure, and I'm not sure I'd agree with it either. I mean, in the 50s, I've just been looking at a series called The 50s that CPAC has had on the air. And the kind of television that we had in the 50s was very, very primitive stuff. You know, the kind of thing that got the biggest audience was the wrestling on Friday night. That was a huge attention getter. The only other thing that had any audience worth mentioning was the hockey on Saturday, but programs got hardly any ratings at all. They were pretty amateurish in many ways, and I don't see that as a golden era at all. Maybe by the time we got into the 70s, it began to improve a bit. But Lord, you know, the 70s were 40 years ago. The differences in technology and equipment and sophistication of broadcast news has just gone up by leaps and bounds ever since. So I'm not sure it was the golden age at all.
So you think we're improving?
I think
TV's
so.
going in a gold place?
I'm not sure that news is improving or that reporting is improving, but certainly the technology is.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah. It's often forgotten that one of the reasons that the fight for freedom of the press took place at all was that individual citizens wanted the right to express opinions publicly. So as much as journalism is involved with gathering news factually and as accurately and as unbiased as possible, there is also an editorial function, which in newspapers, of course, is taken by the editorials on the editorial page. And we felt that television deserved to have the same kind of editorial viewpoint. So I did a commentary every day on the news with opinions in it. Now, I didn't no opinions when I was reading news stories or intros to news stories, but I had opinions about political issues and everyday events that I expressed at the end of the newscast. Most of the other networks seem to think that would undermine my credibility as a reporter, as someone who purported to present only the facts. The truth of the matter is that when they did surveys in those days, me against the others, I had the most credibility of any of the anchor people in central Canada. So obviously my expressing clearly labeled opinions didn't upset the apple cart in any way at all.
Okay, while you were at the CBC, there was a lot of live to air broadcasts. So what was like the process of going live to air?
Well, the process, as you can imagine, was a hairy one. I mean, it was a very difficult thing to do. It meant you had to be prepared at all times. If you were sitting in the anchor desk, for example, you had to be prepared at all times for a whispered instruction in your ear to drop the next story and go on to the one after that, or to stand by. They had a feed coming in and to, you know, tread water for a couple of minutes on the general subject until we give you the signal that the feed is there and ready to roll. So that's the way it was. It was an adventure, I want you to know. A lot of people got ulcers over that process before it smoothed up. But news today is still live in most instances. They have taped items, but the broadcast itself is live. Can't be any other way with news if it's going to be timely. So something you have to live with.
Yeah. And why do you think live to air shows were so popular?
Well, there wasn't any other way of doing it. I mean, and if you're talking of non-news shows, why there was no way of taping them. This was before tape, and they had a strange sort of recording process where they could put pictures on black and white film. But I forgot even what the process was called, but it was a very second-rate kind of quality picture. Nothing you'd want to run again. And so it was the only way to do something that you wanted to have either in color or in black and white, but you wanted to have in good resolution and a good picture, good broadcast picture. Only way to do it was live. Well, you know, as I say, the situation with film was that, and this was before there was a period in between tape and film where if you could get film processed on the spot where you shot it, you could then get it to a satellite feed and bird it to Toronto. But for the earlier days, certainly at the CBC, there was only one way to get film back to Toronto, and that was taking a fistful of money and going to the airport of where you were shooting and trying to find a flight to Toronto and find the pilot and give him a bunch of money to take the film to Toronto, hand carry it, and take it to the CBC. That was, you know, a pretty primitive way of trying to do things, and it meant that you didn't have a prayer of getting anything in the office in Toronto from a foreign location like that in much less than a day or a day and a half. Later, and particularly as people had more money, when we went to global, the time I described earlier, we went to Vietnam. What we did there was we shot film in Vietnam, say, on a Tuesday morning. We flew it from Saigon to Hong Kong, which was a reasonably short flight, 2 or 3 hours, something like that. When it was in Hong Kong, it was offloaded to a news agency we had hired there, which had lab facilities. They would develop the film, and then they would edit the film according to the instructions that our field producer had written by hand and put in with the film that was sent to them. So he'd give them a shot list, and my voice would be in there too, plus tops and tails, stand up on cameras. And the guys in Hong Kong would put the whole thing together and feed it by satellite. And it would get to Toronto on exactly the same date. Not the same day, but it got there the same. We shot it Tuesday morning. It was on Tuesday night's news in Toronto because they were a day behind us. Oh. So, yeah. Yeah.
And competition amongst networks makes for better television. Whom would you say were your competition at the time?
Well, clearly the CBC and CTV both. We're talking about global now, or CBC? Global, yeah. CTV and the CBC were the big ones, yeah. Although we were, you know, we pretended to be equals, but we weren't really. We didn't have the same kind of reach at all. But it was, we were competing, all three of us, for the same kind of audience, at least in central Canada. So they were our biggest competition, and tough opponents.
And what do you think set you apart?
Well, we had a number of different things. We had, I think one of the best things we had going for us was a duo, twin anchors. One was Jan Tennant, who we'd hired away from the CBC, and the other one was me. And she was great. She was really a terrific anchor, and we played well off each other, I think.
If not television, what other career would you have?
Well, it's funny, I was thinking about that the other day, and one of them might have been to be an historian. I'm interested in history, and Canadian history in particular. The other is something that I sort of sheared away from when I was a kid because I wasn't much interested in science. But after I did a series called Great Canadian Parks, and was exposed to a lot of park wardens and the kinds of jobs they did and the kinds of things that interested them in them. I mean, a warden in a Canadian federal park has a marvelous job. I mean, he's in charge of all sorts of things, scientific experiments. He's in charge of looking after the flora and the fauna. He gets out, he's out in the open. He's doing things in beautiful surroundings. He's doing important things for the environment. I wouldn't mind have been a park warden. That would be a pretty good job, I think.
All right, so thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good.
And cut.
Yay! Sorry, I did not interview.